From Wakefield, it's the return of the Nolan Car at Night Show, inviting you back to join Nolan and his amazing guest this week, James Morrison, to the show. And now, here's your host back again to entertain you, Nolan Carr.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of this show, another glorious, momentous edition of the show, intention, I should say, of this program from day one in 2020. It was to provide a piece of entertainment in the form of a conversation that could be enjoyed by anyone and everyone. And let me tell you, this week's guest certainly and unequivocally fits that bill and then some. Whether it be leading the charge in the fight against terrorists, facts of a meteoric-sized natural disasters, sharing a story with the help of six strings on a piece of wood, or even as a Green Beret with the likes of Karl Malden, Eva Marie Saint, and Gary Cole, this son of an office manager has done it all with such class. Although this Jay Morrison didn't write about the strangest of people, my guest certainly is one of the premier actors and playwrights of our time. It is my immense honor and privilege to have on this week the wonderful director and producer of Showing Up, the incomparable James Morrison, as our guest. How are you today?
I'm good, Nolan. Thanks, man. That was a really nice introduction. Thanks, man.
Well, hey, gotta start with some firepower. We were briefly talking about before we got going here about snow and weather and all that stuff and where we are, and I think for you, in your early days around my age and younger, you certainly had your experience with wonderful snow weather and that sort of stuff growing up in Alaska. Given the fact that for me, my perspective is that Alaska might not be, or Anchorage for that matter, even though it's a city, isn't a hotbed for celebrity run-ins or big musical performances and that sort of thing as LA is. So for you, how did you find yourself gravitating towards that as a young kid before professionally getting into the role of acting?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Because it seems like it would be sort of, and it is out of the way and sort of in the boonies and
Yeah,
sparsely populated, But
sure.
because of that, I think a lot of artists came up there just I don't know, out of curiosity. But there was an audience there. I saw some great concerts growing up when I was
Sure.
in junior high school, middle school, and high school. One year, little Joe Cartwright, Michael Landon came up with
Yeah,
the local electric company, brought him up as part of their yearly
sure.
stockholders, show and stuff like that.
Sure.
And that's sort of, I think, music through rock and roll music. That sort of turned me toward a life in the arts, really.
I mentioned in my introduction, quickly sort of, another fellow man with the same name as you who wrote about strange people. Although you might not have been born at the same time, growing up when sort of they were, and maybe even in young adulthood when they were sort of popular at the Doors, how often were you getting harassed or made fun of for having the same name as Jim Morrison, if
No, I
any?
never did. I never did.
Ever?
No, not that I can remember. I
Huh.
mean, somebody may have mentioned it in as wow, what a coincidence, or in passing.
Sure.
But that didn't happen until I came to LA, really.
Yeah. And people were saying,
And
"Oh, are
and,
you related
and
to the real one?"
sorry.
And people are saying, "Oh, are you related to the real Jim Morrison, or
Oh,
are you? Do you know
I
him?"
thought you were dead, or
Yeah.
any number of things that they thought
Yeah.
that they were saying for the first time and that I'd never heard.
Do you know John Densmore? Do you know all these people in the
Well,
group? I'm
in
sure that was
fact, that's interesting. You should bring John up because I had a friend in acting class who said to me, "What are you doing after class?" This was in 1983 or four. I don't know,
uh,
maybe somewhere in the 80s. He said, "What are you doing after class, man? I'm going to a party. You want to go? It's going to be good." I said, I'm not much of a partier.
yeah,
I, I'd quit drinking by then, and so I just didn't. I don't
sure.
know. I didn't know anybody, and I hardly knew him actually. He said, "No, man, it's going to be at John Densmore's house," and so I thought it would be cool, to
Yeah,
introduce you to him as Jim
yeah,
Morrison, because that's your name, And
yeah.
I said, well, I don't know, man. It depends how you do it. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I'd love to meet John Densmore. Sure, I had several friends who were working with John
Sure.
on uh, performance pieces because he was
Uh,
he's a percussionist that did poetry and
sure,
friends of mine, and he accompanied their work and
sure.
talented guy. So I said, yeah. So we drove to this house. I don't even know where it was. It was like I really don't remember where it was. So we walked into the kitchen and John was standing there and he said, "Hey, John, I'd like you to meet my friend Jim Morrison." and he stuck his hand out to shake my hand, but heard my name like halfway through the,
Yeah.
it was this thing where, and he just went, pulled his hand back. And I said, I'm sorry, man. you know, I mean, well, and then I went, well, I don't know what I'm apologizing for, but yeah, my name is James Morrison.
Yeah.
And Albie thought it would be clever he said,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, of course, man. Yeah, good to meet you. And he shook, and
Yeah.
he was a good guy.
Uh,
But that was one of the stupider things.
you've talked about, doing acting way before movies and TV shows as a kid and even young adult in Alaska. Connect for me then working there, doing all those plays, high school, after high school, whatever it may be, to then somehow connecting to New York or California, of then getting to the real nitty-gritty, big time theater and movie stuff.
I think anybody who does it on any level, starting out, there's a moment where they go, "Oh, wow, I wonder if I could do this. I wonder if I've got what it takes or whatever." And nobody knows that
Yeah,
on several levels. But the most important level is, do I have what it takes? Which means,
sure.
am I willing to sacrifice everything
Yeah,
else? And that's the question that actually wasn't. It's the only one that we can answer,
sure.
honestly. The other ones are the other. They're out of our control.
Yeah,
We have no control over how we look, how we sound,
sure.
how people will perceive us, all that stuff. We can only go, you know what, am I going to be able to commit to this without getting there and saying, okay, I'm going to give it 5 years or I'm going to give it a year.
Sure.
Because you can't do it if you do that. You're gonna either be all in or you're not gonna be all in, and it's gonna show. And I just decided early on, 19, 20 years old, that I was gonna do it. That's what I wanted to do for a living. I was gonna make a way to do it. I was gonna make a place for myself in the arts.
Sure.
Not and like I mean, I remember that famous quote, the Stanislavski quote: "Learn to love the art in yourself, not yourself in the arts." So I said, "Yeah, I have art in me. I know that I have art in me, and I want to find a place for it."
In your documentary or documentary film, however you want to describe it,
Yeah.
showing up, an actor who appears in it, Joel De La Fuente, talks about in the documentary how it doesn't really matter if, oh, you went to this acting school or this big time place where you're putting it on your resume to get that job. It matters solely if you have it and if you're able to soar to an extent. For you, early on, going from auditioning and going for theater stuff to then transitioning sort of to auditions for movies and TV early on in your career, how do you remember dealing with it and learning that process?
I love Joel. He's like a brother from another mother, and we're still friends. After working together. I'm going to get it to your question in a sec, but I'm only saying this to say that Joel went to NYU. He went to
Yeah,
Brown. He got his master's from NYU, and he's a he's a proper actor. I mean, he's a
sure,
trained actor, and I think it's easy for him to say that. I think if I have any regrets, and by regret I just mean when you look back on stuff and you go, yes, I think I wish I had done that a little differently.
sure,
I think it's valuable to to go to a school and be
sure,
trained to do whatever it is you do, frankly.
yeah,
Unless you're an extraordinary, once in a lifetime talent and somebody snatches you out of the drugstore because they go, oh my God, that's a movie star. Or listen, it takes a lot of discipline to go to school and get a degree. If you really apply yourself, you can
sure,
float through life generally and just get by. But if you apply yourself and get it, and do that 4 years, 6 years, whatever it is, 3 years, it's gonna change how people perceive you.
sure,
They're gonna go, you know what? You put in the work, man. And so yeah, let's give you a shot. Am I saying it's absolutely necessary? No. I mean, I didn't do it, and
yeah,
I made a living. I'm making a living. I look back on that and go, I did. I auditioned for a school early on when I was
sure,
24, and I did an apprenticeship, a professional training program, from which I got a lot of practical experience
sure,
and good training, on the job training. But I wish I had, and I spent 40 years with the same teacher in LA
sure,
and trained with him rigorously, off and on for those 40 years. And we were dear friends, and I learned an enormous amount about how to be a human being in this business rather than think like an actor. And that was the
Sure.
most valuable lesson I got. Joel was right in one regard that
Yeah.
that it doesn't really matter ultimately. It's what you bring. It's what you bring of yourself to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
For you, whether it be the beginning of your career to then now, all these years later, what keeps you motivated after each work to find more and then to possibly succeed in getting that job?
I don't really like to audition. I went through a period of getting offers too.
Sure.
After 24, I got offers, just straight offers for stuff. And it's always weird when you don't have a chance to try it out or
Sure.
try on, like it's like wearing a suit that you didn't try on before you walk out on stage. If it might not fit, and you're going, geez,
Yeah.
I hope it fits. And I feel the same way about auditions now too. I'll get something and go, I'm not. I've been doing this long enough to know that I'm when I'm right for something and when I'm not. And sometimes I'm wrong about that. Sometimes
Sure.
I'm just not looking at the big picture, and I'm not looking at the opportunity to stretch. Or it's a maybe I don't want to stretch in that direction.
Sure.
So I get auditions and I'll go, no, I don't. I'm going to pass because I don't want to spend the time working on this.
One of the things I really wanted to speak today too about was a movie you
Yeah.
did about 30 years ago called Without Warning, which is sort of was an interesting combination of things where they had real broadcast journalists and then yourself in there as an actor sharing the story about a natural disaster of an asteroid or
Yeah.
meteor coming to the country, but also other countries, China and France. In a world today where science is of an interesting topic for certain groups of people and for that movie back then to be as powerful as it was, how much did that story resonate with you, seeing as it seems those type of movies always catch flack when they're shown live as real actual events?
That was one of those where I didn't have any time. I mean, they cast those things and they say, "Here's your script. We're shooting in 3 days. See you then." And you go, "Oh man, I've got a lot to memorize here in three
Yeah,
days." And those on air, talking head on air guys, those journalists that are out in the what do they call them? Out in the
yeah,
on location guys.
yeah,
They've got to improvise they take notes and they see
sure,
what's happening, but they can just stand there and go, okay, here's what we heard, and this is what they said, and this is where they're going, and this is why they're doing it, and this is what all I know, and have to look like they're, you know,
yeah,
it's a
professionals.
it's a tough job. That was what I was mostly focused on, and then
Yeah.
in the execution of it, of course, I forget where we were, but it was cold. It was in the middle of winter, and we were supposed to be in France, I think, in the winter
Yeah,
where and so you're standing there, and all I remember of it was once when somebody was standing right next to the camera, and I had to talk to the camera. There was a guy, I think one of the crew members, one of the, just standing there, and he was jumping around and moving and fiddling, and that's always distracting. I
yeah,
remember I had to ask him to stop because he was, distracting me, and so then I felt like I'd alienated the camera crew, which is the
sure.
last thing you want to do. I don't really remember much about that except that, but I do remember that they were trying to do a War of the Worlds sort of thing
Uh,
where,
yeah.
the Orson Welles thing. Yeah. Also, there's here and now, well, now the word from our sponsor. So they're
Yeah.
going, wait a minute,
Is this real or
what's
not?
really happening?
Yeah.
That would cut away to sell toothpaste.
Was there a moment that for you though where you worked with someone that was very impressive to you that you sort of looked up to or marveled at that you learned to not bother them as a fan would?
I've never been one of the people that bothered people as a fan would, but the only time that I remember being so completely starstruck that I was stunned to silence. I use this as an example, and in fact, it changed the way I deal with famous people now. Was at Sundance when I was standing in line at the buffet for lunch one day. Felt this guy next to me, and then there's Bob Redford.
Wow.
So, and I mean, I was, I was, there were a lot of people around, so it wasn't
Sure.
just him, but I could not speak.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I couldn't say, hey, thanks, Bob, for hosting this. And by the way, I really love your work, and you're awesome.
Yeah.
Whatever you say. Mostly it's just like, thanks for the memories, or
Yeah.
I appreciate you, or whatever. But I
Yeah.
couldn't say anything. So after that, I went, you know what? That's it was just wrong. He was the host. I should have
Yeah.
thanked him, but I
Yeah.
couldn't. I couldn't
Sure.
speak. So I said, you know what? Next time I meet somebody famous, I'm just going to say, hey, whatever circumstances, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I come out of my shell a little bit because they're just human beings
Yeah.
after all, and we're in the same boat.
Speaking of that character, Bill O'Brien, a few years after Catch Me If You Can, you scored a pretty good stroke of luck of getting onto this big time show. I take the perspective of there are some people who are actors, and there's one particular, I don't know his name, but someone who was in the first Godfather as the character Paulie, who sells out Vito Corleone, who ends up getting shot in the market. And
Yeah,
he
yeah, yeah.
and the actor who played him wasn't in a whole lot of stuff otherwise. So that character kind of became his sort of identity and existence to an extent where there are so many other people who do so many other different type of roles. So they're known for a wide palette of stuff. For you, seeing the fact that you've done a lot of interviews, this form or otherwise, where you get asked a lot about 24 and what it was like working with this person and that and how you got killed off and that sort of stuff. How do you come to the acceptance of you being known a great portion of your career as that role, Bill, in 24, rather than some of the other stuff you've been a part of that you might have been more happy about?
Oh, I was really happy with that job. Sure. I mean, if you're going to be known for something, you want to be known for something that you felt you did your best work in, or some of your best work. So I'm really happy with. I don't mind that at all. I
Sure.
mean, listen, it's as an actor, you want to be known for something.
For you, not being someone necessarily perhaps a diehard of that show or watched it a lot at all before you got the role, do you think that helped you come off more natural in your performance first starting out, or is that not the case?
No, no. I mean, I didn't watch the show. I mean, I watched one episode the night before I auditioned, and then, and based on what I saw, I just said, "Oh yeah, I have to do this." I sort of felt like I willed it to happen.
Sure.
It didn't matter. I mean, I got to the set, and I had to be Bill Buchanan under those circumstances, coming into a situation much like I came into in the story, brand new to the situation, just got briefed walking in or the day before or the moment before because it's moment to moment. And I had to sort of felt like I was flying by the seat of my pants. And that's exactly what the story was. So it was kind of easy.
I mentioned earlier, both in the introduction as well as a point I made about a question about bringing it to the table rather than your sort of resume of experience, and that's a documentary film that you and your wife directed and produced that came out 10 years ago this year called Showing Up. And I found it entertaining from a viewer's perspective because you're having not just actors in general sharing their process of the audition process, but you're having different eras of actors in there telling their process. I mean, of course, you have Jonathan Groff, Sam Rockwell, Zoe Kazan, and Joel De La Fuente, but then you also have people like Lois Smith, Tom Lacey, Pat Hingle, and Eli Wallach in the production as well. Was that your goal for this film, or was that something that just kind of naturally came with people coming out of the woodworks to want to help?
Oh no, yeah, we wanted to get actors for as many generations as we could. So yeah, we were able to get Lois and Pat and Eli from back in like we were talking about the actor studio days back in the
Sure,
50s. But yeah, and we had help. Jim Carnahan and Kate Boca were our casting directors, and they just called people and said, "Hey, some friends of ours are making a documentary about the audition. I need you to show up on Tuesday. I've got a slot open at 4. Will you be there?" And they go, "Yeah, man." And they showed up at the hotel and or at the rehearsal studio wherever we were filming.
sure,
And we made 2 trips to New York. And then in LA, we just did it at our house and called people we knew or friends of friends because LA agents were a little different than New York agents.
sure.
LA agents said, "Well, so what are you going to pay him?" I was like, Nothing, man. It's a documentary. It's
Yeah.
we don't have to pay him in the first place, but come on." So we just, I mean, LA and New York, that's a kind of an example of how different they are, the mentality.
What I am unsure of, so you certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed as though the camera was going, the camera was recording them, and they just spoke. There was no maybe structure to, well, what happened when this happened. It was more of just letting them tell their story completely open and honestly. What was the structure like when you got these people to sit down and talk about the story? Were there so many questions asked, or was it just speak
Yeah,
and you record
it was a
them?
conversation just like this,
All right.
and hopefully, we have somebody like me who doesn't know when to shut up. and they just ran, went on and opened up, and if they didn't, then if they veered too far away, I'd try to bring them back. Or
Sure.
it was an interview. It was just like this.
Yeah.
If you had cameras on us both, you would see a conversation.
Yeah.
And then when we edited it together, we tried to edit it into a flow,
Sure.
you know, complementing each other based on what somebody else had said, and and expanding on a theme, But yeah, the only one that had sort of did a running monologue, and he was so good at it, and I knew him really well, and I knew he could do it. Was the very first interview that we did was Pat Hingle. The rest of them, though, we had a great conversation.
One of the actors I mentioned that was in this, and unfortunately now he's passed on, like I think Pat is as well, but
Yeah,
was Eli Wallach. And at the time, he was probably 90, 88, 89, 90 years old. And that was most likely
he was 93, I think.
that
Yeah,
was most likely probably his last role, because I believe he passed away in 2014, 2015.
shortly
For
thereafter.
for you to have him in that as one of his last participation projects he
Yeah.
was in, and everything that he achieved, what did that mean to you, as not just as the director of it, but also as a film enjoyer who had this legend in front of them?
Oh, see, this is a great example of what we were talking about too, because I met all these people that I was a huge fan of. I mean, every single one of them. Well, yeah, I mean, I was an honor to talk to Eli in the first place and to meet him. He was a dear man, and couldn't have been more generous and gracious. We were in New York we were filming at the Four Seasons to take me to let me go for three days to film it. And I would meet the actors in the lobby, and then we'd ride the elevator up to the 14th floor, the 24th floor, whatever it was. Wouldn't have been the 24th floor. That would have been too weird. So I met Nathan Lane in the lobby, and we got in the elevator, and thanks for coming. I'm James. And he said, I know. And we were in the elevator, and he said, I'm really a big fan. And I went, oh, what? Oh, no, no, I'm a big fan. It was that kind of thing. I mean, I
Yeah,
was really blown away that he said, yeah, we watch 24 in my house, and I was kind of blown away because it was Nathan Lane. So that was a moment. That was a cool
sure.
moment.
Now, I'd like to say thank you again, James, for doing this. But
My
before we
pleasure.
end today, I want to do a little segment called the One Word Challenge. And what it entails with this is I'll throw out a few names of people, places, or things, and you have to do your best to say a few words that come to mind when you think of it, if you're ready.
Okay. Sure.
First one, Anchorage,
Memories,
Los Angeles,
hell,
acting,
child's game,
success,
work,
Tom Lacey,
inspiration.
and last but certainly never least in this cosmic universe we all called Earth, James P. Morrison.
Isn't it funny that I can't come up with anything?
Yet to be
Um,
determined.
just one, yeah, TBA.
TBA. Well, I certainly think you're a classy man and an honorable one, and
Oh,
certainly a
thanks,
kind
man.
man to take your time out to do this. I know you said that you have something coming up next month in Georgia, I believe it was, that you have coming up
Atlanta,
for a
yeah,
performance. So where can
yeah.
you find information on that, tickets or anything of
Oh,
that nature
sure,
if
yeah.
they're in the
It's
area?
this is my play, that my solo piece. Leave Your Fears Here is the name of my play,
Okay.
and I'm in Atlanta, uh, January 15th through the 25th
Okay.
at the Georgia Ensemble Theater. And you can find out more about it on my website, which is thejamesmorrison.com.
Well, if you enjoy the show, because who the hell wouldn't at the end of the day, do us a favor by subscribing YouTube, following on the audio platforms, clicking up thumbs up, like, hashtag, all that fun jazz, thumbs up to say that you enjoy this. Follow us on Instagram at Critiquing with Carr, and in the words of Johnny Carson, the dean of talk shows, certainly like this one, I bid you all a very heartfelt good night. Until next time, take
Thanks,
care.
Nolan.